What does the future of work look like in Canada? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. The pandemic has caused a paradigm shift of sorts. Now, people have gotten a taste of work from home, and there's certainly a demand for it. It goes without saying that not every job in Canada was able to transition to a work from home setting, but a lot of the office jobs were able to do that. Now, prior to the pandemic, work from home was floated around as an idea, but it wasn't taken very seriously, at least not in Canada. It was something that an employer might grant you under special circumstances, but for that to be the norm, it felt like that wouldn't be something that we'd be looking at least for another decade. It would take a substantial shift in corporate culture to achieve that. But the pandemic presented this opportunity. It was an accelerator of sorts. Now, we can't even imagine going back to a full in office experience for most people who had a job like that. If you are able to work from home in your current role, it's hard to imagine that not being a part of your future. The paradigm has shifted dramatically, and I did have another hope. I was hoping that somewhere along the lines we'd be able to rejig our hours, something like a 4-day work week, which has been tested in other countries and has produced tremendous findings. That would be something I'd like to adopt here too, but perhaps we would need another paradigm shift to achieve that. Looking at it now, it has a similar trajectory as work from home. You see other countries have tried it, you see great benefit to it, and the question is, why don't we just make it happen? There are some barriers of, you could say, uncomfortableness on behalf of the corporation. For the work from home, it was wondering, well, will people be able to still be productive with nobody watching them? What do we do with all these supervisors and stuff like that? With the 4-day work week, the question probably becomes, well, can people still perform all the tasks that they have to do? And I'm fairly confident the answer is yes. I'm fairly confident people can figure out a way to get it done. Maybe it's a matter of adding on an extra hour or two to the 4 days they do work to alleviate the burden of the fifth or something like that. And I'm pretty sure that would be much preferred to the vast majority of people. That is a bit more far off, I would say, so let's just focus on this work from home aspect, which in and of itself is a major change. Angus redid the poll to gauge how Canadians feel about work in general now that the pandemic seems to be on the downward trend. Well, actually, it does seem to be spiking up a little bit in Canada right now, but hopefully we're getting closer to the end. With our vaccination rates continuing to go up, the only thing in our way is the threat of variants, but that's a topic for another discussion. Now, this poll found that nearly half of those questioned would either quit immediately or go back to work but look for a new job if they were forced to return to the office as the norm. So basically how we were before the pandemic. That's pretty interesting. So it's 20% of people said they would just quit, straight up. If their employer told them, hey, we're going back to the office, work from home was fun while it lasted, but it's gone now, that employee would be finished. That's how much they value working from home. And another 25% said, hey, well, we'd be reluctant, we'd go back to the office, but at the same time, we'd be trying to find a new job. We'd be on our way out. So that's 45% of respondents, almost half, had that sentiment. Now, the next question was trying to gauge a person's ideal schedule. How much work from home do you actually want to do? 44% of respondents said they would prefer working from home as the most common type of setup. And the occasional office visit would be welcomed once in a while. So predominantly work from home with the option to go into the office for certain things. And that's the number one option. 44% of people, nearly half would like that. Then you 29% of respondents who said they want to work from home indefinitely, all the time. They want that to be the only thing they do. Then you have 22% who actually would prefer to work from the office most of the time, but have the option to work from home when it's convenient. So the opposite of the first choice, and that's the third choice now at 22%. And finally, you have 5% of people who said they want to work from the office all the time. Basically, they want to go back to 2019, a couple years ago. Based on this data, Angus Reid speculates that hybrid office options will be in high demand, and that probably will be the most likely arrangement for your work setup as we shift to a post-pandemic lifestyle. Now, this might be taken for granted because we've been kind of doing that for the past year or two, but this is major. It's a major change in the way that we approach work, and it's going to present many opportunities for you to better engage in living. The simple fact of not having to commute anymore is already going to be massive for people. Now, add on to that, if you're a new father or mother, you can be home, take care of your kid, and still work. These things are going to be radical changes, and there is an effect here of perhaps not needing daycare services anymore and stuff like that. Being able to pick up your kids because you can take that 15-minute break and get back to work quickly. I do think overall, as a society, we've approached our work and our career with a lens that is far too serious, that elevates it far beyond other aspects of our lives, and that hasn't been for the good. It's been largely a mistake, and I view this change here as a step towards correcting that. Now, the next step, as I talked about at the beginning, is shortening the work week, bringing it down to 4. But I'll take this as a gigantic first leap. Adopting work from home as a concept that corporations are going to wholeheartedly be bringing forward, offering it to you as an option, not begrudgingly, but because they see benefits for themselves too. That's a win-win for everyone, and we'll talk more about the pros and the cons in a second. The first thing I want to do, though, is just lay the ground a little bit. It's not all positive that we're dealing with here. You should brace yourself, because at the end, we're going to get to a pretty large detriment. And I do still think when you weigh the pros and the cons that the pros are a little bit more illustrious, they are more attractive, but there are some serious cons here. And we talked about, the title of the video was something along the lines of, what's the future of work going to look like in Canada? Well, if work from home does become the norm, that's going to be a meaningless title, because work from home isn't going to be captured by just Canada. You actually have erased the borders now, and it can be a position, work from home, that can be filled by anyone across the globe, if they're awake at the appropriate times and whatnot, but still. That's a very interesting thing to consider. Now, the Angus Reid poll says that nearly 3 in 4 Canadians who have been working from home said they've been very productive away from the office and they want to keep it that way. That's one of the pros. In the office, you do get distracted quite often. You get caught up in the small talk, the cafe breaks, whatever it's going to be. Getting dragged into random meetings that could be answered simply by an email. There's a lot less of that, I feel, going on these days. So productivity going up is a pro for the employee and the employer. Now, focusing just on the employee side of things, you do have those life benefits, being able to be a little bit more comfortable in your home office, being able to take those breaks to tend to things that are important to you, whether it's taking your kid to that appointment, picking them up from school as we talked about, whatever it's going to be, you have a greater flexibility now, especially if you consider the fact that presumably your kid would be going to a school close by to your house. That might not be true about your work office. So things are going to be in closer proximity to you. And that's one reason why when you were in the office, you might not have been able to make those trips, but now that you're working from home, it's perhaps a little bit more plausible. Then you have the increased productivity. Then you also have the mental health benefits. That's one thing in the poll that was cited. There are many respondents who are saying that this shift to work from home has helped them get through the pandemic. They can't imagine the stresses of going to work and their commutes. Well, it's not even logical because that'd be a crazy vector for the spread of COVID. But even taking that aside, simply being in the safety and the comfort of your own home was something that was productive and positive for people, and they expressed that in the findings here. Further, you do have a greater sense of freedom. There are some of these arbitrary facts of work that have nothing to do with the work itself that do restrict you. Things like a dress code, for example. At home, of course, if you're in a meeting and you're in a video call, you do want to be presentable, but you can prioritize comfort a little bit more when you're off that. And I do think that has a positive effect and it's correlated to higher productivity. Personally, I don't really like dress shirts. I find them to be uncomfortable and quite distracting actually. Throughout the day, I will become aware of just how starchy and constricting they feel. But now that you can work from home, you can comfortably just don a t-shirt and be feeling your best while you're working, and that's going to have an effect. And arguably one of the largest benefits here is no commutes. Now that's good for you, it's good for your finances, it's good for your family, and it's arguably good for the environment. And you could even put forward the argument that it's good for the corporation too, as we'll get to here. Why is that? Well, they can downsize their office space now. They can save money on rent. They can rent out parts of the office that are no longer needed. If you have less people in the office, you can just save money. There's less need for things like, even like toilet paper. You can get by with less of that now. There's a way to bolster your bottom line here as a corporation if you do things effectively. Now, as a corporation too, you might be able to get away with less supervisory roles. A supervisor probably can't do their job too effectively in the work from home setup. They still could, but it probably would be a little bit more overbearing now. In the office, you have your supervisor. They just sit down, they watch you, they make sure you're on task and whatnot. But at home, you're giving more of that trust to the employee. That's perhaps another cost savings for the corporation. They can cut back on supervisor hours and perhaps hire more doers, people who are actually going to get jobs done, and there will be less resources input to being essentially a burden on someone's shoulder. Further, I do think another paradigm shift here is going to be people not wanting to be crammed into tight office spaces, and allowing work from home is going to enable you to do something like create that more spaced out working environment. You can have people come in on a Monday and then they're work from home the rest of the week, and you can shuffle that. Someone can be coming in on Tuesday and another person will come in on Wednesday. And by doing that, you're going to presumably curb the impacts, not just COVID, but disease in general. And further, you'll probably do something good for people's stress levels. If you do have to go into the office, given what's happened in the past year and a half, I assume you don't want to be super close to coworkers now, being elbow to elbow with them, just because in the back of your mind, you've gotten through a global pandemic. And if you were forced to be in those type of close quarter environments, you'd probably be a little bit stressed out, and your efficiency would probably drop a little bit. So not good stuff, and working from home enables you to counteract that. Now, some of the cons, you could say, are very minor at this point. We'll get to the big one at the end. For the individual, for the employee, there really aren't too many cons here. One of them is perhaps you get bored more often. The monotony of just being in your home office and not engaging with employees face-to-face or coworkers face-to-face, yeah, that can get tired once in a while. Perhaps something like team building wouldn't be as effective, but the key really is to just adopt work from home, but have the option to go into the office once in a while. And that solves that. Now, the biggest negative here is global pressures. If you were looking for a job in Vancouver, for example, at a Vancouver office, the applicants would be restricted to that local demographic area. You wouldn't have someone from Toronto applying because they wouldn't be able to make it into the office. They'd have to move over there. And that's a large barrier. Many people don't want to pick up their life and move to another place in the country to find a job. There are some who will, but that limits competition. It actually favors the local applicants. Now, the people in that Vancouver area are going to be dealing with, let's put a number on it, let's say 50 people who are vying for the job. But when you make that job offer a work from home position, well, now people from Toronto can apply, and those from Alberta can apply, and even expand your thinking beyond that. Those from America can apply. Those from Europe can apply. Work from home is essentially a border erasure. This is going to have a couple consequences, and one of them is, I believe, an increase in competition, obviously, but further, an increase in the need of talent that you have to provide to get taken seriously. Now, locally, geographically, you may have been in whatever it's going to be the 90th percentile in terms of capability, but when you expand that border out to the rest of Canada, maybe you fall to the 70th percentile. And if you expand that to North America, maybe you're now in the 50th. And then you do the rest of the world, and maybe now you're in the 30th. And as an employer, they're going to be wanting the best talent now as a trade-off. The job is work from home. It's a remote job. So let's find the best people. and we're not going to be worried with the constraints of location anymore. That's a trade-off here. Now, to get ahead of the ball here, Canada has to take things like education and training and whatever it's going to be, accreditation, very seriously. Employers, even Canadian ones, are going to realize that, hey, we can make our companies far better by simply expanding the scope of our search, and we can do it very easily with the work-from-home method. Ideally, people should look at the Canadian workforce and say, we want these people. They're some of the best in the world. The education is top tier, they're very capable, they know what's going on. These are the global leaders, and by doing that, you can capitalize not only the Canadian changing job market, but the international one, because it goes both ways. If companies across the globe are now going to be opening remote positions, you can find a job now in America or Asia or Europe. Now, are we doing that though? Are we making our education system better? Are we producing stronger talent? I think all the indicators are saying no. We're not even retaining the talent that we do produce. There's a phenomenon called brain drain, where Canadians leave Canada and they go to America because the jobs pay better, and they become a resident there and they're gone. There goes your Canadian asset that you put however many years of schooling into, and they leave you high and dry. Now, it's not their fault. Canada isn't super competitive in that regard, and perhaps the education opportunities and employment opportunities are just better in other places. There is work to be done here, and I do think back to that crazy article we talked about maybe a month ago now, where in Ontario, the grade 9 math curriculum, they wanted to throw up the script and change it and start teaching these kids that math is subjective. And they wanted to tie in whatever it is, colonial implications into the math curriculum. If you think that's going to make you a better candidate for a job at Tesla, a job at Apple, a job at Google, well, I'm not sure what to tell you. There are better ways for us to optimize education. It's certainly not perfect the way we have it, but it's time for people to wake up. These politicians have to understand that we're truly living in a more and more global world, and we have to compete at a global level. A failure to do that is going to mortgage the future generation of Canada severely. Students around the world, and maybe politicians are not aware of this, are doing things that we can't even dream of. There are grade 9 students in places like China who are far more advanced in their thinking than even the average grade 12 student in some places in Canada. This has to be something that we look at. And I'm not saying to make school more stressful. There are probably better ways to approach education as a whole. But turning it into a woke factory is certainly not the way to go. But that seems to be the prescription that I'm seeing pop up. And I'm sure this topic will arise once again as these trends materialize. As more places become work from home, as more jobs become remote, and as more companies begin to expand their search globally, things like the unemployment rate in Canada, or another factor, look at the amount of quote-unquote good jobs that Canadians hold. These things might dwindle, and at that point, it'd be too late. The time to plan for that is now. So with that, it now brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.